You have two eyes, huh? Do you understand the game a bit? Yeah, have a look.
I'm not saying anything to you in particular because I know you're not too accurate with your reporting.
That's what you paid
so you're
for.
Saying I should resign. So you're saying I should resign?
I think
that's
you should,
your opinion.
yeah.
Is that right?
That's my
okay,
opinion.
Fine.
Are you going to resign then?
No, of course I'm not going to resign.
I simplify things next time.
Good evening, Euro snobs. Good evening, sugar addicts and type 2 diabetics. And welcome to the National Curriculum Off-Season European Tour Cash Grab Edition, where we talk all things Manchester United, Leeds, Aston Villa, everything you come to us for. I'm Josh Parrish. I've got Joey Lynch here with me tonight. How are you, Joey?
I'm going well. And now I realise I've made a massive error before this podcast. My aunt lives in Manchester, and she once sent me a Man United jersey that I have not worn once in 12 years. I should have busted it out for this podcast.
My last Manchester United jersey ended up at the op shop. It had Seven and Parish on the back, which was not my choice as a 13-year-old.
Mine has Lynch on the back as well. Mine has Lynch on the back as well.
That's the worst. I wouldn't have minded a player, but to have your own name there seems like an exercise in narcissism. We've got Teo Pellizzeri making his glorious national curriculum return this week. How are you, Teo?
Yeah, good evening. Yes, stroking my very much real and not imaginary beard as I join you this evening, gentlemen. And looking forward, I mean, really, you've lured me back with the promise of Australia Cup and NPL. So let's not spend too long on the big stuff here. I'm back to talk about, proper football. But yeah, we'll touch on the A-Leagues as well. Let's not worry about that.
Yes, we're trying to execute the APL Football Australia strategy here is lure you in with the sugar and then we hit you with the real stuff. NPL, grassroots, baby. That's where the action happens. We're going to be previewing the FA, or not FFA Cup, but Australia Cup, I should say.
Hard habits to break though, Josh. I mean, can I just say, I only called it the W League on air twice the entire summer out of context. So Australia Cup, I think, is a much harder thing to get your head around. FFA Cup rolled off the tongue so nicely. I think it is a much harder mental adjustment to make, because I still call it the FFA as opposed to the FA. So I think if you haven't made that switch, it makes it even harder to make the switch for the competition as well.
I think FFA rolls off the tongue so well because the F word that we used to use prior to it was, it was a bit of alliteration there. It just rolled off the tongue. But fortunately, we can't blame them for everything anymore. Joey, you were at the Melbourne Victory 1, Manchester United 4 MCG friendly. What did you make of, first of all, I guess the night in question, the event, before we talk about the match in particular?
Well, at this point, I mean, Man United's involved. So the event was... it was a fun event. There were fireworks going off. There was music. There were stars. There was all of this sort of thing. Man United at this point is just as much a travelling circus as they are an actual football club. They're an entertainment conglomerate. In fact, it's been one of the biggest complaints that Man United fans have had in recent years. So, I mean, as an event, it was fine. It was a fun evening. Melbourne Victory went up. Inside the opening 5 minutes, the Melbourne Victory fans started chanting, getting sacked in the morning to Eric Ten Hag, taking the piss. Good showing by the Melbourne Victory fans. I also have to say, they must have only made up around, at most 3,000 or 4,000 of the 70-odd thousand in attendance, but they certainly made more noise than any other contingent of fans in that stadium. So well done to them for providing some colour. But I mean, we've gone over this before, Josh, on the show. The way I look at these games is I I feel it's silly to attach any further existential meaning to them. And I imagine we'll get to that in a bit more detail in a bit. So I went there, to experience it just as a one-off event that I didn't have any expectations for, to save football or anything like that. I went to the circus and I had a good time.
So, Joey, what you're saying is United involved, fireworks involved, this will make headlines. It's a pretty good formula as far as Australian football is concerned. did it move the meter? Because you're in Melbourne. I think Barcelona, the friendly up here, created a lot of goodwill, had everyone feeling really good because of the football product on the pitch, the spectacle, the crowd, nice little bonus post-COVID in Sydney to have 70,000 plus, marvellous. But really, it was about, qual. It was about the A-League All-Stars putting up a really good contest, albeit against a Barcelona team that was on a 3-day turnaround from their last La Liga game and then had flown across the world. Who cares? I mean, when Melbourne Victory were in front, I was excited. I was like, let's not forget, Brendan Rodgers, for all the trophies he won at Celtic, everyone still talks about the Lincoln Red Imps and losing in the Champions League to the team from Gibraltar at the start of his tenure. And I thought, how good would it be for Australia if Melbourne Victory could roll Eric Ten Hag here, and then if Ten Hag finally goes on to be the Fergie successor, we can leave that argument for another day. But imagine if every reference goes back to started his tenure with a friendly loss at the MCG to Melbourne Victory. And obviously by halftime, the prospects of that had gone out the window. But it was nice to dare to dream for a bit, I thought. But did it achieve its purpose? I saw the PR opportunity for the away kit launch on the tram. Did it get the cut through that you were hoping for down south of the border off the field?
I don't think the kit launch made much headway. I mean, that was more of a global event that just sort of happened to be taking place in Melbourne, and you're not going to get...
It was on a tram, Joey. Only Melbourne has trams.
Yeah, in the mud, San Francisco, with whatever the hell they are, that are certainly not trams.
Cable cars.
Yeah, Melbourne's
They're
the
totally
only
different.
place. Yeah, they're trolleys.
They play soccer and they have cable cars.
I think the game itself, I think it was on the front page of the Herald Sun, Man United being in town. The Herald Sun's, with apologies to Nick DeBarno, even though he's not on yet, News Limited and the Herald Sun's relationship with football, especially as of late, has been strained. But Man United got on the back page. I mean, it was as someone that's used to going to press opportunities at Amy Park and being the only person there or just one of 2 or 3 people there, it was weird, basically, that you go down to a Man United press event. Ains, Fox Sports was there, cameras from the ABC, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10 were all there as well as foreign press that I want to give a shout out to them in a bit. But I think it did get cut through. Now, whether it got long-lasting cut through or it's the type of cut through that will be helpful in the long run, I don't place too much stock in that, but it is a discussion point. But yeah, I feel like it did get attention, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the lead into Tuesday's game against Crystal Palace, and if the fact that Man United are playing a mid-table team from London that isn't one of the famous London teams, what sort of attention they can demand in that fixture.
It was interesting because before the game, I was tasked by my main employer, Stats Perform, to do some vox pops outside the stadium. So I tried to get a bit of a sense on the kind of fan that was attending the fixture. Of course, that's skewed by the kind of fan who'd want to come up in front of a camera, of course.
Roaming Josh.
Yeah, pretty much. It was actually stationary Josh trying to attract people over like a carnival barker, roll right up, roll up. Anyone can join fan interviews.
Funny you say that, because I saw an old school spruiker outside a shop here in Sydney the other day. It was outside a butcher's at Great Deals here. Come in here, get tenderloin, 50 kilos, $50 a kilo, or whatever it costs these days. So maybe Josh, that can be your other side hustle. You can be an old school spruiker to try and get the punters in the front door.
Maybe. If this doesn't work out, then it's always a fallback. But I was asking a lot of questions for the global audience, like what do you think of Ronaldo not turning up and that stuff. But I also asked for score predictions and what they knew about Melbourne Victory, what they thought of Melbourne Victory, and it was very much complacency. It was very much 6-0, 7-0. Don't know who any of the players are apart from Nani. This and that. I mean, it varied from fan to fan, of course, but a lot of the fans seemed totally unfamiliar with the A-League and seemed to disregard it as a crap league. And then I did interviews afterwards, and the question was, would you come back and watch Victory after seeing them there? And overwhelming majority of people said, yeah, probably. I'd give it another go. So that's a win. And if maybe they were just being nice because they were being recorded, but that is a win. If a couple of thousand that attended at the MCG that weren't giving the A-League a chance beforehand, give it a chance now, that's a big tick for me.
Great to hear for starters, because you're right, only a small percentage of the crowd that was there needs to be cut off. I can tell you, Josh, MCG staff were briefed. Be ready for people who've just never been to the MCG before. Never mind people who've never been to an A-League game before. This sort of global event, something like a third of the crowd was coming from interstate. So it does mean it was a totally unique audience. Hopefully it does translate to eyeballs on televisions and also devices, and also boots through the door at A-League games. But it's how many you catch in the net. And without being overtly cynical about it, I do wonder how many Melbourne Renegades fans will be deciding not to go to the Big Bash this summer and decide to go across the concourse to Amy Park and watch the A-League instead, because one of their players posted that photo with Marcus Rashford prior to the game. I mean, are we going down this path, or are we going to let that through to the let it through to the keeper? There we go. Cricket analogies already, or do we need to jump on this and actually talk about both that and so the dreaded photo which became inevitable? And Josh, I believe you have an insider's account of the amount of hustle that had to go into getting said photo taken.
Well, first of all, Manchester United, it's an enormous operation. To see the whole thing in action, the reporters, the support staff, there's 4 buses full of people going around everywhere. It is incredible, like the size of this machine. And the players are very much instructed to be in and out quick as possible, not stopping, not doing anything extra. You know, if you see players signing jerseys and posing for selfies and things, they're doing that because they actually want to, not because the club is making them. Because the club doesn't want them to do that stuff because of COVID risk and because, you know, they want to manage the fatigue and all that stuff. So Rashford posed for those photos. It was very much like he was there and then 2 seconds later he was off in the distance, doing a quick interview with the club social media channels, and then he was gone. And the 2 AFL media people with the Sharon, I just started laughing at them. I was writing, so I saw them, and they kind of gave me a knowing look like, yeah, we know, this is a bit tacky, but it's obviously something they were instructed to do by head office. And, you know, Rashford was long gone and away down the Amy Park tunnel before, you know, they had a chance to give it to him. But the actual event promoter took the Sharon and said, do you need it back? And they said, well, no. It's not as if the AFL has a shortage of Sharons. So, you know, the promoters of the match made it happen. So they clearly see it as in their interest.
Not to go full inside baseball, but Will Carter, who's part of the PR team, Bursty, that was part of promoting this event, used to work out of AFL House for AFL Victoria, and he's a good operator, so fair play to him. But
I mean, I think I would just say Rashford got out of there. The only person that got out of there quicker than Marcus Rashford was the Victorian Sports and Major Events Minister when I wanted to have a word with him about why we're not getting Socceroos and Matildas games.
Well, we can come back to that, Joey, but do you think the AFL read the quote tweets of the Rashford photo? And do you think they care? And I say this as someone who's been a Hawthorn member for 21 years, and I was watching the AFL this afternoon with all my little windows open, filled with NPLW from New South Wales as well. But do you think they care that it just got like a 95% overwhelmingly negative response, and the only responses that weren't negative were people saying, gee, they wind up easy? That was it. No one actually said, this is cool. You know, wow, Rashford loves the AFL. It was like a torrent of soccer Twitter at its absolute finest. It really was.
Yeah, but I just don't think the AFL would care about Twitter. You know, like it's a bubble.
Then why put the photo on there? If they don't care about it, why would you put the photo up there?
Probably because whatever software they use, you know, Hootsuite or whatever, automatically posts everything to the Twitter. Like, I don't think they care. You know, it's up on Instagram.
Do you think it doesn't hurt them in Western Sydney? Because people were replying to this with Kevin Sheedy's quote about how the immigration department works for Western Sydney Wanderers to get them fans. And that's from 2013. People have long memories. Do the AFL not realise that it kind of shot themselves in the foot because people were introducing a new generation of potential fans to Kevin Sheedy's overt, he claims, accidental xenophobia when he was coach of Greater Western Sydney?
No, I mean, I'm looking at this now on Instagram and, you know, To be honest, there's a video of Rashford posing with all the players. There's the picture of him, and I mean, well, to be honest, I'm not. It's probably the algorithm doing its thing and all of that sort of stuff. But to be honest, the comment I'm seeing with the most likes on Instagram is a North Melbourne fan saying that he could probably get a game for them at the moment. So it
well, maybe not after Friday, but
yeah, it seems to have gone down. Like, and those things are for Instagram. They're for TikTok. They're for Facebook. They're not for Twitter. And even if they were, I don't think the AFL gives two hoots about, that most of the quote tweets were dunking on them, because you know what every quote tweet does? It spreads it, and it gets more impressions, and it gets more interactions, and it boils more piss, which I imagine some people at the AFL enjoy doing as well, because you know what's going to happen. I don't think they care. Basically, I feel like
but that comes back to the question, Joey, because you can tie in your thoughts on the sort of games the Victorian government is trying to attract. But when the FA, Football Australia, not the FFA, signed off on this game to take place under their jurisdiction in the country of Australia, why would they not stipulate in the contract that it has to have elements of cross promotion with local grassroots, A-Leagues, Socceroos and Matildas, and it doesn't cross over into rival codes? The gold standard of global superpower team touring Australia was Juventus back in 2016 or 2017. They went out to Moreland Zebras. They went out to CB Smith Reserve. They
now Brunswick Juventus.
Brunswick Juventus, yes, apologies. Save me the emails. They erected two massive video screens at either end of the ground. They had a DJ. They had the best atmosphere for the NPL that I can remember. They turned it into a proper event, Juventus. They actually took over Zebra's social media for the week. They bought in. They were awesome, Juventus. And no one that's toured has done that since. And it's kind of heartbreaking because they set the bar so high that you kind of want every global superpower that comes out here to do that, because it engaged football, and that's what made it so special.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I think Football Australia probably didn't put their foot down was because it's more the APL that is going to take the heat for this than Football Australia for one thing. As we saw, I mean, the amount of times I saw Danny Townsend get tagged in a comment that, really he had nothing to do with that thing. I mean, Melbourne Victory barely had anything to do with this game. The pre-game press conference, Eric Ten Hag and Marcus Rashford, no Victory presence whatsoever. I mean, Josh Brilliante came out eventually for the Amy Park photo op and did some things, but I don't think he actually got a photo or anything with Rashford.
Was he just late? Did he miss it? Was he supposed to be in it? I'm not sure.
They had lunch at 1, and that was deemed a more pressing priority than by the football department.
Hey, man's got to eat. Man's got to eat.
Lunch is a very important thing at Melbourne Victory. It's just, regardless of if Man United is in town or not, media events always revolve around lunch. Not through
Tony Popovich carves the leg of lamb himself.
I think it's like a thing that dates back to pre-Popovich. To be honest, it's just a thing at Melbourne Victory. Lunch is one of the big things that you don't mess with. But after the game, there was no Victory media. There was a mix zone where you could grab players, but that was just more. It was a mix zone in the sense that we just grabbed the players that had come to the Man United dressing room to try to get a shirt or a picture or something like that. It wasn't formal. Victory's media manager did do a good job of grabbing Jake Brimmer and making sure that he said something, but it wasn't a formal thing. Tony Popovich didn't do a formal thing. Victory were basically a passenger in this entire thing as well. I think I made a joke that sort of turned into it was a half joke, half reality, and I didn't get any pushback on it with some Victory people, that they were basically paid in exposure for this game more so than anything like that. But when it comes back to the game itself, it gets to the point you were making about the Victorian government, Teo. The Victorian government were ponying up money to bring Man United to town, and they want to maximise visitors to Victoria. They want to maximise all of that sort of stuff. They want to promote the game as much as possible. They don't give a toss about how it's promoted, just as long as they're maximising their publicity. And if you're Football Australia, you have to ask the question, is it worth expending political capital? Is it worth trying to push shit uphill to get all of those provisions inserted into the agreement?
But
when
is there a quid pro quo? Because we hear government relations is one of those buzz terms that gets used both at national and state federation non-stop because it's the gateway to facilities funding. But, I mean, these aren't the government relations we want. I mean, Martin Pakula, does he not still owe me an apology for no Brazil versus Argentina friendly? The people of Victoria will be demanding answers. No, not really. I mean, no, we weren't. But, I mean, I guess as soon as your last Socceroos or Matildas game is played in your city, the clock's ticking until their next visit, and it can blow out to 3, 4, 5 years very quickly. And I'm old enough to remember Rene Rivkin, the late Rene Rivkin, when he bought out Brazil to play Brazil, I think under 23, to play against the full Australian national team. But Ronaldo, originally, Fenomeno Ronaldo, came out with them, but they couldn't work out the insurance, and Ronaldo didn't play. And this is in the Annus Horribilis 1999, when the Socceroos didn't play an A international for the full calendar year, and the game was seemingly at its lowest ebb. But, I mean, we're not back to that point, and we probably won't ever be. But how much have we really moved on when this is the discussion we're having after this game? A game that, again, we led with the positives. Let's not forget. This isn't, aggressively bitter cynics hour here. But still, it would be remiss of us not to investigate these points more thoroughly to see how these things can be done better.
I think it comes back to the fact that, as I said, victory or a passenger in this thing. Compare that to like the A-League All-Stars game against Barcelona. The APL had a lot more ownership over that fixture. Yes, the Barcelona fixture was brought to them and all of that sort of stuff, but they were able to get, like the email addresses of all the attendances to add to their, as Mr. Townsend called it, their data lake, and all of that sort of thing. Yeah. Yes. So there was just more involvement. And I guess that's what it comes back to. From what I've seen throughout this entire thing, it feels like this entire thing is a party of the event organisers and the state governments, and football is just sort of along for the ride. It feels more like Melbourne Victory got the gig to play because, I mean, who was the other team that was supposed to come out before COVID? It was a West Ham. I mean, if West Ham hadn't pulled out and said, all right, well, we know we had a contractual agreement a few years ago pre-COVID, but we're not fulfilling it now. If they hadn't done that, I have no doubt it probably would have been Man United versus West Ham at the MCG instead of Melbourne Victory. It sort of feels like because you got to remember, look at all of these, the Man United tour, Liverpool in Singapore, Victory at the G, Palace at the G, and I think it's Villa in Perth. Victory's the odd side out in that. It just sort of like feels like Victory got the gig because they couldn't find anybody else. And that's because it's being run by the promoters and the government. I'm not saying that to just disparage Victory. Like I think the game went about as well for Victory as it possibly could have gone. I think they made a very good showing of it. Like if they're being paid in exposure, I think they got paid a decent amount. But I just think that's the reality of what's happened here.
So, well, I mean, in terms of what we do better next time, I just want to refer back to that Juve tour. Juve is the gold standard of mega powers coming out here. And I am very old. I remember going to Leeds versus Colo Colo, this team that is so dear to our hearts here on TNC.
I was there at that game as well.
Yeah, we were all there. But it makes me wonder, why aren't Olympiacos, Panathinaikos, Dinamo Zagreb or Hajduk Split, why aren't these mid-tier clubs coming out here, choosing an appropriate sized venue and tapping into the football marketplace as well? Yes, the biggest possible teams move the meter. And Joey, you rightly point out, Crystal Palace won't. But I just feel as though now that COVID's, COVID's not over, shout out to the Ladies League, buy a mask. But I do feel as though that now international travel is back on. Surely we can broaden our palette, because you might remember, Joey, the International Champions Cup, which started 2015, that was a 4-year deal, and they only played 2 of them. And the second one fell flat, I think, because they bought out Spurs and I can't remember the other 3 teams that came out that year. But after the spectacle of Cron and Real versus Roma, the drop off to year 2 was enough to scare them away, and they didn't come back in 2017 or 18 to fulfill the rest of the deal. So I do feel as though there can be tiers and layers to this to make the circus and make the off-season spectacle even better and more authentic. And that will, I do truly believe, convert more people into fans of the game broadly, potentially into players, if it is, again, first experience at the MCG or first experience going to a football game at all. And then thirdly, convert them into A-League fans.
Well, I think the reason we might not see that is a couple of reasons. I mean, one, these tours are heavily disruptive for teams' pre-season preparation. I mean, you can see Palace have only brought out 8 senior players to Australia for their thing. And I mean, there was an article in ESPN by, I think it was Ogden, talking about just how disruptive these pre-season tours are for Man United, but they do it anyway because the commercial benefits of it are so great that they sort of have to do it. So it's sort of, it surrounds the opportunity cost. Is the disruption to your preseason and your squad outweighed by the economic benefits that your club can bring? For clubs like Olympiacos and Hajduk, I don't think that, the cost benefit, the opportunity cost is worth it to come out.
Olympiacos played Victory
what about
10 years ago?
What about some pull factor? What about some pull factor from the A-League then, and not entirely push factor from the visiting team?
Well,
because
that could
because if Barcelona goes knock knock, hey, we're desperate for cash, can we play in Australia? Everyone says yes, right? But what is stopping targeting those teams other than maybe I am too much of a nerd and too deep in the weeds here, fantasy booking potential off-season friendlies?
I think that might be a way to make your idea work, Teo, because I mean, I was reading an article, I can't remember if it was in pounds or dollars, but these Premier League clubs apparently get 2 mil just for every single game that they do on these tours. And that's outside of the commercial opportunities with sponsors and everything they get as well. So maybe because Ains, certainly your, teams, Olympiacos, Hajduk, and your clubs that can target, certain markets in Australia aren't going to get that from governments and promoters because they don't have that Premier League NRI. Maybe that is where the APL steps up and dips into the Silver Lake money and uses it as a loss leader to try to bring fans out and try to engage these fans, by bringing out the likes of the teams you're suggesting. Although that might run into the problem that a lot of the fans that these bring out might already have Australian clubs. They're just not playing in the A-Leagues.
Yeah, that's the point. I mean, I think, Victory, as you say, Joey, have no leverage in this situation at all, and neither does the APL. They're not involved. Football Australia takes a rake, of course, because they've got to get the referees out there and they take their little cut. But that's
don't forget insurance is probably the most arduous part of all of this in case someone gets injured. Yeah. And Joey, well said last week about Simon Colosimo. It is still a travesty to this day, 23 years on. It is.
I will die on the hill that Simon Colosimo's injury against Man United, one of the biggest sliding doors moments for that golden generation. Absolutely.
Not just sliding door for everything. Imagine if we'd qualified for the 2002 World Cup in prime time in Australia.
Well, did we see
he was one of them.
I was going to say, did we see the John McGinn tackle on, was it Archie Gray from Leeds? Of course, not a young Australian player, but he's okay apparently. He got stretched it off. A horror challenge. This stuff happens,
But see, that's okay because there's it's not the Australian team's fault and it's not the pitcher's fault. They can settle that between themselves. It's Leeds and Aston Villa's problem.
Lou Sticker doesn't have to file a lawsuit regarding that challenge.
We're not, and I use the big collective we for Australia, we're not responsible for that one, so.
Get off our back. I mean, the third-party promoters are the ones driving this, and that's the reason that you see all the the cringy photo ops and so forth. And their only interest is to make as much money and to drive as many people to attend the game as possible and then get out of town. So I think it's unrealistic to expect anything more from these fixtures than just a bit of buzz, and hopefully by osmosis, if an A-League team is involved, you draw a few extra people to the league games. I know you give the example of Juventus, Teo, but I think that's based on probably the promoter that they were working with at the time having some knowledge of the local scene and wanting to tap into a particular diaspora.
But Joey mentions 4 busloads of people. If you've got that many staff, someone knows something. They can't all pretend to act like snobby, big-time hotshots that think that Australia is still a penal colony that is occupied by convicts. Some people on those 4 buses would have a good understanding of what modern Australian sporting landscape is, I hope.
And
Joey,
I would just point back that I don't think they care, Teo.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's dollar signs. Like I said, Man United's a commercial brand first, a football team second.
Well, can I ask you, Joey, can you take us inside the press box briefly? Because I want a little debrief of what it was like to have basically the Old Trafford press gantry visiting the MCG and you to be seated amongst your brethren. I believe it was a match made in heaven.
It was magical. I was surrounded by angry, bitter, disillusioned Brits. Oh, I was with my people. It was fantastic. They were just ripping on Man United players throughout the game. They were making jokes. They were tearing strips off the Man United media manager for a lack of access. It felt I was with my people. I felt like it at home. I'm not going to be able to go back to a standard A-League's press box now after experiencing that. It was fantastic. It was, it was definitive proof that myself and my old man, Michael Lynch, are not unique. We're just been transplanted. It was incredible. I can't wait for Tuesday purely because I just want to get more of the toxicity, just bathe in more of that anger and toxicity and cynicism. It was amazing.
I don't know if this is too inside baseball, but they were all so angry about Erik ten Hag not doing a post-match press conference. It was unheard of. It had never happened before. It was a travesty, and they did a little exclusive sidebar in the mix zone that was only for the English written press, and Australian journalists were ushered away from I think it was Zidane Iqbal. So.
Can I just point out, Man United does do that well, ensuring access. The news came out about Eriksen's signing, I think, overnight in Britain. I was there. They all got that briefing email several hours in advance, and, so they could all get something up and in the papers and write about it. Man United are in town. Man United paid to bring all of those journos out to try to build up these relationships and fix these relationships after the game. They were talking about, what do you need? What information can I get you? It felt like that Man United, you talk about them as a corporate brand. Well, their communications department seems to be pretty good on that front. Access to Erik ten Hag notwithstanding, although you distinctly get the impression that's more Erik ten Hag's resistance than the Man United press department.
So you're saying, Joey, they're not calling him Erik ten Dad just yet?
Well, at the introductory press conference, Erik van Haag was mentioned at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
already?
Okay. At least he wasn't in the room at the time. But it was, everyone looked around. It was a bit of an awkward introduction and showed the clientele we were dealing with at the time. But let's talk a little bit about the game itself before we move on. Tony Popovic going with his 5-3-2, throw everybody behind the ball, and for a glorious 40 minutes, it worked a treat, Joey.
I tweeted out during the game, before Man United's equaliser, the game was going exactly as Tony Popovic would have drawn it up. They were sitting back. They got the early goal in transition, which was I didn't know Jay Barnett could do that. The way that he instigated that move with the 1-2 and then drilled a pass up the flank for Ben Falami. It was a lovely goal. in transition, and then that allowed them to set back up in their defensive block. You know, Man United had a ton of the ball, which you'd expect. I mean, the disparity in skill. I mean, what Bruno Fernandes's wages could probably bankroll well over half the entire A-League men competition. Like, you would expect, like, Man United to have most of the ball and to dominate possession and to dominate territory. But Victory set up in a manner that I thought really prevented them from having really good goal-scoring opportunities. Like, up until, like, I think Izzo had to make one really sharp save from Fernandes before the equaliser, but a lot of that's to do with the fact that Manchester United were a bit ineffectual and not as good in possession as they could have been. But I wasn't in a state of panic about Melbourne Victory's defensive fortitude, which was remarkable considering that they were starting George Timotheo and Lee Broxham as two of their three centre-backs back there, although that did eventually cost them the goal.
Well, I mean, I didn't really see the difference, the disparity in skill level, especially in the first half. I saw a lot of U-shapes. I saw a lot of sideways passing between Fred and McTominay in midfield. I thought, I've seen this movie before, and it's been at every A-League game in the last season, pretty much, that the Newcastle Jets weren't involved with. So I don't think
maybe Popper has a mind trick that he just goes up to the opposition coach before the whistle, and just when they're shaking hands, he just zeroes in, and all they can think of is U's.
I saw no signs of the Ten Hag revolution, aside from maybe Martial's performance. So yeah, look, I don't think Victory were totally outmatched. They just set up in a way that was, damage limitation, and in the second half, United looked a lot better because they had a different profile of midfielder on the ball to move Victory around, and just natural fatigue of chasing the ball left to right and shifting it and so forth, end up making the game open up and eventually picked off. But let's not forget that United's route back into the game was a wild deflection and a total fluke, and we might be sitting here talking about an upset, about Victory parking the bus and holding on for 1-0 if that doesn't happen. So, I thought it was a great effort. United, I think we're not really here to pontificate on United's prospects in the upcoming Premier League season, but if they don't sign Frankie de Jong, boy, they're in trouble. But shall we move on to other things, gents? I think it's time. What's up next? Any other words on the friendlies that we've seen? Maybe Joe Knowles scoring a goal against Leeds United.
Great story.
Yeah. Tune in on the 20th, which I believe is Wednesday, for the Aston Villa versus Brisbane Roar game in Townsville, because that'll be me and Harps. So forget everything I just said that wasn't 100% on the bus. Tune in, please.
I mean, Joe Knowles, for people who don't know, outstanding player in NPL Victoria this season and last season as well. He's sensational dribbler. Had his first breakthrough in the A-League at Perth Glory. Didn't work out for him, but I think a well-deserved chance. And he's been flying in and out weekdays during the week with Brisbane Roar trialling, then flying back on the weekend to play for Oakley to try and compete for a championship. And they didn't have him last night against South Melbourne, top of the table clash, and boy, it showed. So I think the hustle is real for players trying to make the leap.
The thing is, though, did he need to score in order for everyone to talk about him? Would his performance without the goal have been enough? I mean, Brisbane have done, I think, a great signing. I know you guys debate, he's a 5, he's a 6, Charlie Austin every week, Balotelli is a 9, by the way, for everyone playing at home. Balotelli is a 9. Thank you.
And just for everybody playing along at home, Teo Pellizzeri is Italian.
Yeah, no, true. Both are true. Balotelli is a 9, and I am Italian. But without the goal, has Knowles done enough? And more to the point, we've been down this road before, whether it was Kenny Thew at Victory or other NPL players that have broken into the A-League, and everyone's excited because we were there watching their journey. Is this going to be different in some way, or is this just the next player to do it?
I think from what we've seen of Warren Moon as a coach, he's certainly more inclined to trust and play NPL players than Kevin Muscat was at Melbourne Victory, albeit, I think Kevin Muscat loved Kenny Thew as a person and a player. He just didn't trust him on the pitch. Except
in the Asian Champions League.
where he was a monster.
The happy hunting ground.
Yeah. I think Knowles Knowles' skill profile is very different than Kenny Athieu as well. Knowles doesn't rely on his physicality and dominating NPL opposition with his athleticism to the same extent that Kenny Athieu did. So the transition should ostensibly be a bit easier. As for the game itself, well, I mean, with any of these games with A-League men on position versus Premier League sides, if you're an attacker, your scope to impress is almost exclusively going to come in transition, because any A-League men's side, not wanting to be embarrassed by higher quality opposition, is going to sit back and defend and try to hit their oppositions in, well, when the Premier League side has their first team on the pitch or something close to their first team on the pitch, they're going to sit back and defend. I think Brisbane got a bit more into the game in the second half against Leeds, but that also coincided with Jesse Marsh heavily rotating his squad. So in those sort of situations, you're going to be limited to moments in transition, and that's what Knowles did. He popped up in a moment of transition, and he's converted, and he's got his goals. So, I mean, he was playing a role, and he did what was asked of him. So you've got to give him credit for that.
And the latest intel that I have from talking to people last night at Lakeside is that Knowles' involvement against Bonnyrigg is under question because Warren Moon wants to take him to Townsville so he can keep looking at him in training. So that's very promising. The fact that he won't be involved in Townsville for Brisbane because he is, of course, cup-tied in the Australia Cup from the earlier rounds in Victoria and is ineligible is a bit of a bit crap for Oakley if they're without him against Bonnyrigg, but that's certainly promising for his A-League prospects. So I've got my fingers crossed.
If I can give a cheap plug, make sure you tune in to Bonnyrigg White Eagles versus Oakley Cannons, because I am commentating that game as well. So make sure you get on 10 Play and watch Australia Cup.
Yeah, and to talking about Oakley, and that kind of transitions to our Australia Cup preview pretty well.
Well, I just wanted to quickly get your guys' thoughts on something. Have you, because we spent ages talking about Man United's engagement. From what you've seen, do you feel as though Leeds and Villa have been a bit better on that front with what they've been doing in Queensland than Man United? I mean, I know Leeds have been here a bit longer, and so it's been a bit easier, but it feels as though, I'm not sure if it's because there's more APL involvement or the different promoters or what have you. It feels as though Villa and Leeds have been getting out and about a bit more than Man United have.
That may be the stature of the clubs just makes it that much easier. Less hazard, less risk, more freedom, more flexibility.
They're not too big for it, like United, who swerved their 70 or 80 fans who were waiting for them at the airport by bringing the team buses right on the tarmac and going out the back door. So they're just not too big for their boots. That's really all there is to it, I think, Joey. But I would like to return to Australia Cup if we may, because
you've blown completely past questions and comments, Josh Parrish.
Oh, okay, fine. Anything you want to draw attention to in particular? Dale says victory versus Celtic was fun back in the day. Tell that to the French exchange student who accompanied me and my friends to that game, where I asked him what he thought afterwards and if he enjoyed it, and he said, no. Which is all I got out of him.
Quite literally a Euro snob, Josh.
Yes, indeed. Then again, he was a French, so what are you going to expect?
Was it a French? Was it an au pair?
No, he didn't get his citizenship. But shout out to Guillaume. I don't know what he's up to these days. I thought that was a shocking game and decided by a deflected Scott Brown goal, in all honesty. But it was a nice atmosphere that night. Antonis points out that Olympiacos came and played victory in 2012. Didn't do much outside the game, and Marvel Stadium was too big.
I did look up that game, and I want to defend myself for completely forgetting about it by saying that was played. Let me look up the exact date. That was played 1 month after my allogenic stem cell transplant, so I was busy fucking not knowing anything except death at that point.
Yeah, glad you're still with us, Joey.
Yes.
Let's go to the Home of Legends question. Once Wyndham City Stadium gets built and Western United look for a touring club to open the stadium, who should it be?
There's only one answer. Sassuolo.
Sassuolo. The green and black derby.
Yes.
We can ask Sassuolo whether the green of the trees and the black of the bitumen inspired their kid as well.
They wanted Arsenal to come out and be their first opposition when they came into the A-Leagues. So
they'll get someone. Believe me, if the stadium gets built, they will be in a position to bring someone.
I mean,
they will splash the cash to bring someone as well.
Diamante connection as well. We could have West Ham or whatever.
I think they'd aim
Italian
higher than
teams
West Ham.
played for.
I think they'd aim for a Big Six Premier League opposition or a Juventus, a Milan, an Inter.
Bayern Munich.
Don't think that, someone like that. I don't think they could get Real or Barca on their own, but they'd aim for as high NRI as possible.
Yeah, let's see Messi in Wyndham. I can picture it. Let's
just Nick Stoll just knocking down the door when he hears Messi's on his way to town.
Peter Allen says original festival football was Wolves, Fulham, North Queensland Fury and Glory. Fun times at the old NIB Stadium. That's a throwback. We're not doing any more North Queensland Fury nostalgia content. I think we had an entire episode dedicated to that.
Are you saying we ain't spending any more time on it?
No, because there are bigger problems at play, Joey, such as people being ripped to pieces by crocodiles. Where's my hat? So Oakley Bonnyrigg. Teo, I don't know anything about Bonnyrigg, but Oakley are without a centre back because Oscar Dillon has gone down with a hamstring injury. And they have literally no one to replace him. So given Oakley will likely be missing a senior centre-back and potentially their best player in Joe Knowles, would you give Bonnyrigg a shout in this one?
I mean, the travelling team always has potential for a decrease in performance, but Oakley is an overwhelming favourite. I mean, looking at the New South Wales NPL top division, it is one of the best title races you can imagine. I'll run through it quickly. Blacktown and Marconi, 37. Olympic and Manly on 35. Sydney FC, Apia and Rockdale on 32. This is all with 2 games to go. Here's the problem. None of those teams made it into the Australia Cup round of 32. We have 7 teams that could all potentially make finals, could all potentially win the grand final, could all still mathematically win the Premier's plate with 2 games to go. But none of them made the Australia Cup. In fact, only one team from the top flight made the Australia Cup, and that's Sydney United. They're playing against Monaro Panthers. And the twist in that game is 4 days later, they play in the Waratah Cup final. So, and they play against Northwest Sydney Spirit, who's one of the other New South Wales teams from the second tier with Bonnyrigg that made it in. And the other team is Wollongong United, who are from the 6th tier in Australia. So a lot of romance. But sadly, one of the best things about the Australia Cup or the old FFA Cup was the chance to pit Victoria against New South Wales, NPL against NPL, on a bigger stage than the NPL National Finals. Players' minds aren't in Bali or Byron or the Gold Coast at that point. They are still very much in season and playing hard. You know, Mark Rodan coaching Sydney United and bringing them down to Melbourne to take on Heidelberg United under George Katsakis. Those were the great ties. And then the one that Heidelberg went up to Adenza Park and beat Sydney United up there. They were the great Australia or FFA Cup ties, but we don't have that this time. Maybe Bonnyrigg can give us an opportunity, but I think that New South Wales, unfortunately, the title race has pulled everyone's focus away from the Cup this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame when you don't get, I guess, your league's best chance to impress on the national stage, but equally, chance for an underdog to make an impression. Who else from New South Wales, if anyone, Teo, has impressed you enough to suggest they could do something in this competition?
No, I actually think that with Sydney United, 58, want to win the Waratah Cup on that weekend. They're playing well. They're mathematically out of finals contention. There's no relegation this season because 4 teams from the second tier are getting promoted in. So the likes of Bonnyrigg and Northwest Sydney Spirit, along with Western Sydney Wanderers, are all competing to get promoted into New South Wales NPL 1. But the big prize for Sydney United 58 is the Waratah Cup. You want the piece of silverware. If it means that you lose to Monaro Panthers with a rotated team midweek, so be it. You know, and I think that the chance to be on the honour roll of a prestigious trophy is more now, I would argue, than the promise of potentially getting into a match against an A-League opposition. Because even, as much as it was great for RPL Leichhardt last Australia Cup, which was only as recently as November or October. Yeah, I think it was November when they beat Western Sydney Wanderers. They're not back this time. They're trying for 2 trophies on the domestic front rather than going for something on the Australian stage.
Well, Joey, same question to you then. From Victoria, who do you see as best placed or most likely to make a run here?
Well, when you look at the teams that have made it from Victoria, it's sort of like, I guess maybe sort of a very different problem than is being faced by New South Wales, in the sense that the teams that have made it, Avondale, Bentley, Green Gully, Heidelberg, and the Oakley Cannons, they're all right in the thick of things for, they're all fighting for finals places, and they're all fighting for finals positioning in the Victorian League. I think South Melbourne are the only team at this point mathematically guaranteed to be playing finals football. Now, disaster would have to strike for the Oakley Cannons not to play finals football, but at the same time, there is an advantage in finishing top 2 because you get a week off. And then there's the battle for seeding, and there's all sorts of stuff surrounding that. So it could be, a factor that has to be taken into account is that, some of these teams might become distracted by the race for the premiership and the race for the league, which has happened in the past. Clubs have decided to prioritise the league, and it's affected their Australia Cup hopes. Now, assuming that all the clubs, want to put their best foot forward and push for, make a cup run, it automatically just then becomes about who has the top end talent. In a one-off game where everything goes right, you get an A-League man opposition, something like that in the latter stages. Who is capable of, surprising them? Who's capable of going on the road and getting a win like that? And at that point, you're probably going to be looking at teams like the Oakley Cannons, if they can get everybody fit, and assuming that Brisbane don't steal Joe Knowles away from them. It's somebody like Avondale, who are mired in some poor form in the league, but they have a ton of talent on their books that on their day are capable of beating anybody. And but then you even look, Bentley Greens, Heidelberg, Green Gully have top end talent on their books. They've made runs before. I think looking at the member federation teams that have qualified, if any NPL team does make a deep run, it's odds on going to be a Victorian team, I think.
Yep. No, I agree. As much as I'm, again, let's bring in Nick DeBarno while I tell an old irrelevant war story. During lockdown in 2020, I was commentating the Darwin League. I've never been to Darwin, by the way. I was commentating the Darwin League for about 18 straight weeks off a computer monitor from the Sportscast studio in Reservoir. And I fell in love with that competition during 2020, and the Mindle Aces went on to win the league. One of the issues is their best player in the grand final was 43 years old. So as romantic as it would be for the team from Darwin to knock off Avondale, even the travel factor should not be an impediment to Avondale punching their ticket through to the round of 16. And as Joey says, it could be Gully. Nahuel Bernardo could be that player that, potentially wins the Mike Cockerell medal and gets himself an A-League deal, because he's certainly been sniffing around the fringes of one in the last A-League off season. So maybe now's his time to shine.
Although with you got to say that Hellenic against Wanderers, I think the pushing the Wanderers, that is one of my favourite Australia Cup / FFA Cup memories. So the travel factor, I think, if the travel factor is going to be a factor in any game, it is the trip to Darwin.
Dare I say, NPL team in season versus A-League team first game of pre-season might have been the reason why Sulav Maski and Hellenic were able to trouble Western Sydney Wanderers so much that night. But Sulav Maski, very good player.
Yeah, that was a good match. I remember calling up the president of Hellenic. I think it was the night before, trying to get him to come on an FNR preview show, and he was so like indignant, like, "What do you want to talk to me for?" But it was fantastic. We got him on. He was absolutely delighted when he realized what we were doing, and they were just stoked to have some national attention there. A little moment in the spotlight. They very nearly made the most of it. Nick Tabano, welcome. You've quietly joined in the background. Your word on Manchester United Melbourne victory before you move on. We'll give you the last word.
Hey guys, again, apologies. AFL duty calls and the 320, bounce down time, as they call it these days, become a new word.
Yeah, Nick Tabano too busy posing with a Sharon to come on TNC.
Yeah, no, genuinely. So, they handed me a Sharon, and I was too busy getting a photo shoot done. But honestly,
Nick, that's what you were doing at 320. What were you doing at 420? Don't answer that.
Come on, Tayo. But yeah, look, the unfortunate 320 time slot, it does interfere with TNC, but alas, I am here. Manchester United versus victory. Well, I mean, in terms of the spectacle, it was all right. Like, I thought, decent turnout, 75,000, I think, in a COVID world, and, considering no Cristiano Ronaldo probably meant an extra 5,000 or 6,000 tickets didn't get sold, I think is pretty good. The spectacle itself was I thought it was fine. The game itself, look, victory had one good passage that had everyone purring and everyone saying, is that it? Is that what, Chelsea and City and everyone's going to look at next season and go, Jay Barnett's pass down the line is how we're going to expose Manchester United next season. And playing someone like Ben Falami off the shoulder. But yeah, I mean, it was a lovely worked goal. I mean, parity was restored. If you thought the result was going to be any different, then, I mean, for a second, I thought, like, I had a line or two just prepared just in case if victory were to win. But we all knew, I guess, that what was going to happen next. But if we're just looking at victory as a whole, I mean, defensively, they set up really well in the first half. I was quite impressed with that. But once the damn wall burst. I think that there were some really good showings from guys like, I thought Roderick Miranda was very good. Paul Izzo looks like an upgrade between the sticks. In midfield, I mean, what can you really judge out of the midfield? They didn't really get much on the ball. They were just sort of running around, acting as an extra shield. And I mean, Ben Falami stocks to the roof. I mean, that guy is just, he was really good. And I think, that little play, just burning Victor Lindelof. I mean, it's not hard in the foot race when it's Ben Falami versus Victor Lindelof. It was a lovely ball to Economides. And apparently Economides caught the attention of Jadon Sancho, or just as he was called, the number 7 yesterday. So, I mean, good on him. But yeah, good to see Nani for 5 minutes. But as a whole, I can't really complain too much. It's a spectacle. It's a friendly. You had 75,000 people at the MCG. We've rarely had over 70,000 people at any sporting event since post-COVID. So for that, it's a big tick for me. So looking forward to Tuesday night when Palace come to town as well.
All right, let's get to some questions. A couple of people asking about National Second Division. Homer Legend says the quote-unquote imminent National Second Division announcement has seemingly taken 12 plus months now. Is it possible Football Australia and AAFC are both playing hardball with each other over it? Devek also asks, gents, are you hearing any more intel on the status of the National Second Division for next year? Seems like clubs are well away preparing, i.e. South Melbourne's sponsorship deal, big dollars on that one, and RPL Leichhardt securing a venue for Second Division games. Well, I think it is easy to be cynical about this one and say there are long delays. We keep kicking the can down the road and we haven't heard anything. But I did hear something yesterday. The NPL clubs sort of meeting with Football Australia and the work that Football Australia have put in down to the fine details and the nitty gritty of this. And myself, I'm short on details about this, unfortunately. But it was described to me as, a phenomenal amount of detail that the clubs were provided with. So that's really, really encouraging. It's the first thing I've heard for some time.
Basically, what happened was last month, the people that have been working on this with at Football Australia, who I can't remember the name of his company, but they've hired Anter Isaac's company, his consultancy, the former head of football in New South Wales, his company, to work on this project specifically. They produced a series of different models, took those to the FA board, not to get approval. The FA board will still need to give a final tick at some point once everything's actually what model is actually decided on, and they'll need to give final approval. However, the FA board examines a series of models that have been produced and costed, and all the requirements drawn up, ranging from a pure Champions League model to a pure home and away model. I think they ticked off on a series of models, and now they have gone out to their meetings with prospective clubs. I think James Johnson's been at a few of these meetings, as well as other people involved in the process. And now basically what's happening is that they are talking to clubs and saying, here's the models we've looked at. Here's what it's going to cost you. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's all of these other details. What can you afford? And I think just as much as what can you afford, they're also now starting to ask the question, what are you doing to get ready for this? Because it's not simply a matter of, clubs saying we can afford this, we can do that. Football Australia is now beginning to say, here are the models, here's what we think it's going to cost. What steps are you taking to ensure that you can afford these models that we are presenting? It's not enough to just say, we can do it. Show your work, basically, which is now why we're starting to get, I think, a few signs of clubs bringing on board sponsors, clubs securing venues, all of that sort of stuff, I think.
Yeah, and anyone who remembers, I think it might have been back in late January or February, my monologue about Avondale's court case and the bespoke decision, and putting it in that national second division context. I want this competition to happen. I want the clubs to give it a go. I want the clubs to, be sincere and give it their all. And it is actually really encouraging to hear that there is a thorough level of detail behind the scenes. I just hope the public rollout is one that can get everyone rowing in the same direction. I mean, I'm unashamedly in the tank on this one, wanting it to work at every level, at a footballing level, at a development level, at a media and promotion level. My hand is up. I'm on board, and I want it to work. Simple as that. And I think really, I've also been at the more at the casino edge of the risk assessment of, do not let perfect be the enemy of good. Do not let adequate be the enemy of do not let good be the enemy of adequate, and do not let adequate be the enemy of functional. Let's have just a functional crack at it, and if it backfires and if it doesn't work out, so be it. You tried.
Let's have a perfectly cromulent second division.
I really don't think the material position of many of these clubs in 10 years' time will be any different if they give it a go and it doesn't work and they have to go back and start from scratch, because that happens in football all around the world. So I won't ramble on any further. It is great to hear that there is more thorough detail in the pipeline.
Can I just respond to Torres's comment? And I'm going to have to predicate this answer by saying I have had absolutely zero information on this. This is completely me hypothesizing and guessing.
Same by the way. I've had zero information as well.
Yeah. Torres asking, would an NSD be a perfect time for a separate TV deal for that league on FTA TV like ABC or SBS? Personally, the way that I think any sort of broadcasting deal is going to need to work is that Football Australia are going to have to assume the costs of production. They'll have to pay, probably, contract a production firm to do it and pay for it. And then they would either seek to monetize the NSD itself on its own platform, whether that just be YouTube and Facebook with inbuilt advertising and plugs and sponsorship, or they take it to their existing broadcast partner, Channel 10, and say, here's a sweetener, have it for a series of years as proof of concept. And then when it comes time to renegotiate the next broadcast deal, now we're also talking about a viable second division as part of the package. And that also can, when the next broadcasting deal is being negotiated, you can take that to anybody else as well. That's the way I see it working. I don't see I don't see it going to free to air, even if it does end up with 10/Paramount. I can't see Channel 10 putting it up on their terrestrial channels. It would be I reckon wherever it ends up, it's going to be purely online.
I mean, yeah, and if you wanted to get onto the ABC or SBS, you wouldn't just be paying for the production costs. You'd probably have to buy the airtime as well, and that's definitely going to be prohibitive for a competition in year 0 going into year 1.
I do remember the National Second Division blueprint coming out, and a little tidbit at the end saying they'd had the AAFC, that is, had promising discussions with SBS. So I'm not sure how much stock to put in that, or whether that's a little bit of nostalgia creeping in. But,
well, it needs to be remembered, and I'm going to repeat this every time we talk about the NSD. You know, a lot of people, I even see it, you know, online, and people commenting about, oh, the AAFC won't do this, the AFC won't do that, or the AFC said this. The AAFC, big fan of the work they've done. They've done a lot to drive the conversation surrounding the NSD and really push Football Australia and really help on that front. The AFC aren't deciding jack, okay? Like, at the end of the day, they're going to lobby. They're going to put forth their own research. They're going to do as much as possible. Football Australia is the one making these decisions. That's so, like, if you're the only
and
way.
If there's anything we've learned from the last 2 years, doing your own research only gets you so far.
Very good, Josh. So, yeah, if the only way you can definitively rule something in or definitively rule something out surrounding the NSD is if you hear it coming on the record from a Football Australia individual.
Thank you, Joey. It's just reminded me, Teo's spiel from a few months ago. It's reminded me of a question we got on Twitter today. What is the status of the 2021 NPL Victoria Premiership? Nick DeBarno, I'll throw you on that one.
Well, is it the 2021 NPL Premiership, or is it the Avondale Cup? Like,
it's the bespoke shield.
Yeah. Well, the status of it. Okay. Well, I mean, last night, for those who watched or were just keeping an eye on it, if Oakley had beaten South Melbourne last night, they would have won the 2021 championship. I was reliably informed that there were some people inside Oakley that were not going to celebrate it as a bit of a statement to basically to Avondale and to Football Victoria. So they decided, I mean, that if they won it, cool, it's a premiership, but like why are we even competing for this? So that was sort of their logic behind it. Unfortunately for Oakley, they didn't win. They lost against South Melbourne, so they have kept it alive for another week. So Avondale, it's back in their hands, and they're playing Port Melbourne now on Tuesday night. It was still on a Saturday fixture up until yesterday, where they were actually playing off a 2-day turnaround against Port Melbourne. And so Avondale are hosting Port Melbourne, I believe, at ABD Stadium, or the former ABD Stadium, down in Broadmeadows. And if they win that game, anything else but a win will mean Oakley wins it. But if Avondale wins, they win the 2021 Premiership. So that's Tuesday night, straight after, a few days after they play, obviously Thursday night against Mindle Aces. So they're flying back, getting ready for that. And they're going to probably hold some big bloody party if they win as well, because, I mean, it's sort of this bespoken trophy for them that they feel that they were so wrongly outed by last year because the season got postponed. So, I mean, they should win, but Port Melbourne, on the other hand, are getting the turnaround. And Port Melbourne, for those who have been keeping an eye on NPL Victoria, are actually third on the 2022 table and above Avondale. So it's not going to be necessarily an easy win. Probably wouldn't say that they're just going to waltz all over them. It's going to be quite an intriguing contest because there's a lot on the line. So if Avondale don't win, like, this is the one thing to remember, if they don't win, there are a lot of people that are going to find this very, very funny. Like, in terms of boiling the piss, this is right up there because this was their trophy. They fought so hard to get that title.
It was supposed to be a formality, and it's clearly not.
Yeah, and they had that massive gap on top of Oakley, and Oakley have now have jumped them. They're into first. So, yeah, keep an eye on that on Tuesday night. It's going to be very, very intriguing to see what happens one way or another.
So, Nick, no open-top bus parade down the Eaton Mall if Oakley win. But where do Avondale take the bus if they win? High Point car park? Or
no, not the bus, Teo. No. The Pronto cement mixer laps around
the
Lygon Street.
Pronto cement mixer.
Puckle Street? Do they go down Puckle Street, or where do they take it?
Are they going to go to the spiritual home, Teo, or are they going to take it around Parkville?
What Doyle Street Reserve? I mean,
yeah, going to go up to actually where Avondale actually is, not in Parkville. Because, I mean, for those that don't know, Avondale actually don't play in Avondale. They play in Parkville at the Reggio Calabria Club in Brunswick. So Yeah, good question. Maybe they'll just try and, God knows what they're going to do. But yeah, the Pronto cement mixer, Josh. I mean, if they might cut the top of the cement mixer and get the players inside. I mean, it's probably not the best idea because if the cement mixer's turning, they're going to be going around.
That's a Simpsons. That is a Simpsons skit right there, Nick.
Can I just say the Pronto cement mixer? Saw it recently.
Yeah,
the Italian paint job is gone.
No, I've seen one recently.
I saw it last week.
So you think there's only one Pronto cement mixer, Joey?
Pronto I know. I've seen. I recognized the front. The front still had a little Italian decal. The rest of it's gone.
There's more than one, Joey. I can tell you that as a fact. I can tell you there is more than one. They're out there in numbers.
It's only coming back when Italy qualify for a major.
Yeah,
when Italy do the improbable and beat Belgium in the Women's Euros this week and go the long way and shock everyone and win the Euros again in England, I'm sure there'll be something along Ligon as well.
Any other words on the Australia Cup, the format, the fixtures? Heidelberg United, Brisbane Roar is a tasty one for mine.
Can't wait for that. Can't wait for that game. That's going to be awesome. And I really hope, as much as it would be, Brisbane want to get Charlie Austin out there for one of the games against the English sides. I think it's Villa next. I would love to see him debut down here in the Australia Cup. Imagine his debut being at the Olympic Village. And he, I think that would just be pretty cool for us. To see that happen. So I'm looking forward to it. And Heidelberg, I mean, they've been actually, just because this goes to show how much they're out of the loop I've been today because of footy. Did Heidelberg win today? Because I was about to say, are they in good form?
3-2 over
there you go.
Tight one.
So the Burgers are in form going into this one, guys. They're going to be up and about for that one.
They're in form at the moment. They're not actually playing till the 27th. So they could be out of form.
That's
at that
one
point.
Game before then.
Of the games coming up, I think Bentley should account for Broadmeadow at home. We've discussed Bonnyrigg and Oakley and the Aces and Avondale. I'd be expecting Armidale to also get the job done over the Modbury Jets from the state leagues in South Australia. I'd be expecting at home the NPL WA team to get the job done there.
Can I just say one thing about Heidelberg, Joey? Do you really think Dandy City are going to beat Heidelberg next week? Going into that game? I don't see that happening. So no, I think Heidelberg. But if we're talking form over a period of time, Heidelberg over the last 2 months have been in as good a form as anyone in NPL Victoria. So I don't think it's a bad. I think it's actually a fair shout to Sarek, and they might push Brisbane Roar. And they've made some good signings in the mid-season. So why not? Bit of magic again on a Wednesday night, the Olympic Village. I'm all for it.
I was just trying to segue into the games happening this week, Nick. I wasn't
sorry.
Antonis is coming through and saying this is getting very Victorian, so we should.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to get away from.
Well, I'm sorry, Antonis.
All right, let's get out of Mexico and look more broadly at this whole island. Nani confirmed, but Cesc Fabregas has decided that Campbelltown is inferior to Lake Como and will be playing in Serie B next season. Nick Debano, what can you tell us about this move?
I mean, look, I'll be brutally honest. I don't know too much about Como as a football team. I just know that George Clooney lives there. I know it's beautiful. I mean, there's the backdrop there. I think, just to say the least, who wouldn't want to play for Como? I mean, Como, I think from memory, I'll do a bit of quick researching while I'm saying this. I think they actually are quite a historical club. Like, I think they've had a bit of success in the past, was the former Como. So, I mean, their coach is a Gattuso. It's Giacomo Gattuso. It's not Gennaro Gattuso. So he's going to be playing under a Gattuso.
Sometimes maybe good, you know.
They're actually owned by Dennis Wise, who used to play for Chelsea, talking about sort of a bit of interesting. Yeah, so Dennis Wise is the owner. He's the chairman. Sorry. The owner is the Jarum Group, which is actually a tobacco company. An Indonesian tobacco company owns Como. So Cesc Fabregas is going to be on the money of the $6 darts that are bought in Bali from most Australians that head up there. But basically, yeah, I mean, look, in terms of living location, who wouldn't want to go live in Como? Like, I know that's going to play in Serie B, but obviously knowing Fabregas is towards the end of his career, he's just gone from living in Monte Carlo now to go live in Como. I think there's a trend here, guys. He wants to go where the location is, and at this stage of the career, and they're probably paying him good money to go there. You know what I mean? Like, he's probably going to be the guy there. He wants to live in a fancy location, rub shoulders with George Clooney. You know, why not? Why not? But it is a shame.
We can't rule out him.
Sorry, go on,
back on. we can't rule him out. Him being back on the market in 12 months anyway for this exact
Oh,
same
absolutely.
conversation.
It's a 2-year deal, but we know that these deals sometimes they do get cut short. For
he
me,
must be
honestly,
waiting for Western United Stadium to be built. He's got his eye on Tarneet.
maybe
Monte Carlo, Lake Como, Tarneet.
Tarneet. Why not? But yeah, look, it's a shame he won't be coming to the A-League. I think that just in terms of Fabregas coming here, it would have been cool to have a second high NRI player coming to the A-League. But I mean, when you're comparing it in terms of places to live, like I know that you can compare the standard of Serie B to the A-League and probably make a fair judgment, say that a lot of the A-League sides are probably better than most of the Serie B sides. I can say that definitively. But we're all human, and I think if the opportunity came to go play in Cornwall, I think that 9 people out of 10 would probably say the same thing in terms of having that opportunity to go and to rub shoulders in Cornwall and live for that beautiful lake there, even though it'll be in winter and it'll be freezing.
Well, so Lazar Markovic to Sydney FC is not the Nani Fabregas demographic. However, is that the demographic we're settling for from this point forward? Are we the magical list of 35? We never actually got to see, and the names Fabregas and Nani may have been strategically leaked, maybe not, but we don't have any great insight into who else was on that list. Do we think there's another boot that's about to drop, or are we now operating in the Charlie Austin sort of Lazar Markovic sort of territory? I threw out there in the chat that we used to prepare this show that Danny Osvaldo has not been retired for that long. I mean, let's not forget, Thomas Sorensen retired, then signed for Melbourne City. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that guys who just stopped playing during the pandemic may have had minutes left on the clock. But does anyone want to throw some names out there and start the aggregators on rampant speculation?
Well, I mean, looking at transfer market list of free agents that are still out there. I mean, when we're talking about a marquee strategy here, and I know it didn't win me a lot of fans during the week when I talked about Nani as a sugar hit, but APL CEO Danny Townsend 2 months ago, went on the record saying that, I know it gets criticized. I'm paraphrasing here. It's not the exact quote, but I know it gets criticized as a sugar hit, but the league needs sugar right now. So let's pour some sugar into it during the off season.
In your defense, Joey, that's the fault of people who literally weren't paying attention to what the head of the APL said.
Yeah,
what can you do other than literally quote the guy in charge?
Yes, but using that criteria, using Danny Townsend's words against him, for lack of a better phrase, when you're looking at the marquee strategy, if there is a marquee strategy, it needs sugar to be successful. You can't just, rely on your Charlie Austins or your Markovic's and say it succeeded. Nani is the type of play you need at minimum 2, probably more likely 3 or 4 players of the Nani standard. If this definitive strategy that you've put in place, you're using private equity funds to push it, is to be successful. So when you look at that, I don't think the APL should be settling for, Charlie Austin and I forget his name, Markovic, the Sydney fella. Good players, I think.
Markovic.
Lazar Markovic. Yeah, my head went to Dalibor. I just they haven't signed Dalibor Markovic as a Markovic.
So Joey, I mean, I think maybe your piece that used the term sugar got a lot of backlash, also because Melbourne Victory fans think that they are the one fan base that doesn't need that. Wouldn't it be ironic, though, if after that is the off-season strategy that Nani to Victory is more or less the only big name that ends up getting landed?
Well, I mean, there's a history on that front. I mean, there was talk of Torres and Honda to the league, Torres to Sydney, Honda to Victory. Which one ended up happening?
No, but my point is they're not lifting the lowest the lowest crowds or the struggling teams, they're making the big teams bigger, which, by the way, I'm all for. I'd get rid of the salary
that's
cap.
the way that
I would get rid of the salary cap and make it a boat race and let the big teams be as big as they can possibly be.
Yeah.
But that really then upsets, your fans of your Brisbane Roars and Central Coasts who know that effectively they need the shackles on the top teams if they ever want to. I still think that they would innovate and find ways to remain competitive, by the way. I think getting rid of the salary cap and kind of
like Melbourne Victory aren't going to turn into Manchester City without a salary cap. There's still a limit to the amount that Victory will spend.
Exactly. And I think that sort of dog-eat-dog environment and increasing the level of competitiveness could actually be really good for the innovation that you see in the clubs that don't have pure brute force money to make something happen. But it would be highly ironic if the biggest marquee goes to the biggest team with the most reliable fan base.
Well, but when you think about it, like the very nature of this marquee push with the APL helping to fund these marquee that arrive, unless the APL help funds a marquee to every single club in the competition, it is by its definition anti-competitive. Some teams are being given an advantage over others. So it's sort of inevitable if you're looking at it through an economic lens. If you're looking at it, how are we going to get the most bang for our buck? It is almost, from that perspective, the marquee should be being pushed to Melbourne Victory, to Melbourne City, to Sydney FC, to Western Sydney Wanderers, because that is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of media coverage.
Brisbane did it the best. Brisbane had Broich, and Brisbane is
as a competitive international bringing in. I 1,000% agree with you. I'm purely looking at it through a diabetic sugar perspective.
But also Brisbane's the easiest city to sell. Sydney maybe if you're on, if you're in, a certain location. But I really do think Brisbane's the opportunity here. And why aren't Charlie Austin is good. Don't get me wrong. I'm very happy with that signing.
Yeah,
I think more optimistic than plenty of others were about him. But I really think that Brisbane's the city that could be the sugar hit city to get the big name in because they've got so many selling points for the lifestyle that maybe aren't being utilised. And I'm surprised to hear they're not being linked to anyone else for that sort of a big name marquee.
Yeah,
I think there's a distinction here between the designated player that Markovic is rumoured to have fallen under, which is not, as I understand, APL funded. And it's by a sidebar, very interesting to see a new category quietly added to the salary cap and then Sydney making the most of it immediately. I feel like that's a pattern we've seen a few times. But Markovic coming in as a designated player, which is not the same as MLS. This is not the Silver Lake money being used to help fund the salary
1,000%.
versus Nani, who really has the name recognition index cut through. And that being worthy of APL funding. I think those are two different profiles of signing. And I think both are potentially good for the A-League.
Yeah,
quality, but Markovic isn't really going to bring the fans in unless he starts lighting it up.
End of the day, anyone who goes to see Nani once, but then is shown a display of sterile sort of handbrake football, may not necessarily be lured back twice. There's still the greater onus is on the coaches and the administrators of the clubs and the people who set the direction, whether it's the director of football or the board or whoever. It's still their responsibility to not just bring people once. The way you play and the way you implement the marquee player within an aesthetically attractive sales pitch, winning alone can't do it because there's a premier every year. There's a champion every year. You still have to play the game in a way that brings people back a second and a third time.
And that's I think, Taylor, that's what makes this marquee strategy so fraught, that there are so many different ways that it can go wrong. Like for one, like the marquee strategy, if you a big part of your off-season plans to promote the league is marquees and you only end up with one, it's not really worked out. But then even if you end up with 3 or 4, and this is another point that we have talked about in the show and you've just raised it then, if they're playing sterile and bad football, doesn't matter how good they are because they're not going to come back. It really is multiple avenues of why this is such a fraught endeavor that the APL has decided to go down. I think we've all, TNC, we've made clear on several episodes that we'd rather, none of this bullshit was just, being fostered, and that it was just, for lack of a better word, you let the clubs loose. In our perfect world, there's pro rel, there's a pyramid, there's no salary cap. You rise or die based on your own intellectual, your football IP and the football you put out in the park. It's just because, this is the reality that we live in, that we have to critique and analyze the APL for what they're doing. And I think you're absolutely right. It's the reason their strategy is so fraught. If they don't get anybody else other than Nani, I'm like looking at transfer markets, free agents. Cavani is still a free agent, even though I think he's in negotiations with Monza. I know maybe somebody call him up and say Bonza instead of Monza and try to confuse him. Diego Costa, I think, is a free agent as well. You've got to be looking at, these, if you are going to have your strategy surrounding Marquees, these are the players that you need to be looking at and looking to bring in. Marcello's a free agent. There you go. Probably the only left back in the world that would count as a sugar hit marquee. You've got to get that right. And then if this is the path they're going to walk down, that's the things they've got to get right, in my opinion.
I missed when Marcelo became Italian all of a sudden, by the way. He's got so much name recognition that Joey can't say it right.
What did I call it?
Marcello.
Marcello.
As in Lippy.
It's Marcelo.
Anyway, Marcelo.
Oh, you're making fun of my accent again.
No, we're not making fun of your accent. You just used the wrong C.
All right, come on. Come on, Nick, you have a point.
What else? What I was going to say is just in regards to Sydney FC and the Lazar Markovic strategy, I think one thing we're forgetting is they were going for Dries Mertens. Like, in terms of a marquee strategy, like, I know he didn't play in the Premier League, but a lot of people know who Dries Mertens is, not even just rusted on CDR fans. And the one thing that, again, that I've spoken about a lot is especially around people my generation and maybe 5 to 6 years younger, 5 to 6 years older, is that there is a massive FIFA generation. And people who know who Dries Mertens is will be FIFA players because, again, they would have seen him on Ultimate Team. They would have seen him playing with him with Belgium. Like, Belgium is massive NRI. Like, the guy who birthed NRI, Ante here, he will be able to tell you about Belgium being all full of NRI. Dries Mertens is one of those, well, not like to the same level of Kevin De Bruyne and Romelu Lukaku or Michy Batshuayi playing Premier League, but people would know him because of that sort of situation, the fact that he's played on FIFA and everything. But in terms of him coming in, if he was to have been signed by Sydney FC in a hypothetical world and a target, that would have been a freaking awesome signing because Dries Mertens has come off probably not his best season at Napoli, but he's still got enough in the tank to be a really, really good player here in the A-League. Because I still think he can do it in Serie A. He can do it in a top league in Europe. But in terms of Lazar Markovic, I mean, I don't think it's actually that terrible of a signing. I mean, I won't lie. I haven't watched Lazar Markovic play since that first season at Liverpool. But in terms of what he did at Partizan last year, it seems like he didn't have a terrible tenure at Partizan. And I think that, he scored 12 goals in the 2020-21 season. From memory, before he signed for Liverpool, he wasn't necessarily a terrible player by any stretch. And on top of that, he's still only 28 years old. So it's not like he's past it by any stretch. So I don't think it's a terrible signing. And I think if he signs for Sydney FC, I mean, there's enough Liverpool fans that do know him. Despite him being a Liverpool flop, there'll be enough Liverpool fans that actually think it's pretty cool. Like, Josh, no
one's saying it was a terrible signing.
No.
From a football perspective, it's a good signing.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying anyone said that. I'm just saying that. They're just calmer guys, all right? What I was saying is, before I finish, I literally mentioned it. I didn't say anyone said it, though. I wasn't even putting words in anyone's mouth. Just calm down, for God's sake. Anyways, what I was trying to allude to is I spoke to Liverpool supporters and, people who I know who, I was like, Lazar Markovic might be signing for Sydney FC. And they're like, what? Like, shit, that's pretty cool. Like, I actually want to go and see Lazar Markovic play. Like, if that's enough for a few people to turn their interest and say, geez, Lazar Markovic is here. I know it's the thing about maybe if they're coming here, they might only come here 3 or 4 times this season. But hey, it's a few extra bums in seats. It's Liverpool fans that want to come and see him. You remember when, I know that he didn't play that game against Western United, but Daniel Sturridge was teased to have played that opening home game when Western United played Perth Glory. That was actually, in fact, one of Western United's best home crowds of the season. And from memory, there were a lot of Liverpool fans in the set, so probably more Liverpool jerseys Then I saw Western United or Perth Glory jerseys there, which does say something a lot about the state of probably those clubs and their support here. But still, in that same sense, I still think that, Markovic might actually be able to maybe get a little bit more interest just from that Liverpool diaspora, because I think that Liverpool are probably the highest supported club here in Australia, maybe on par with Manchester United, but if not, maybe more. So, yeah, I think it's not a terrible signing. I'm curious to see once it gets announced and see how it works out.
I do want to give. I can't remember where where it came from. The comment was, but I wanted to give a shout out to the person that hypothesised that the reason Milos Ninkovic left Sydney was because they heard they were signing a partisan captain, and he immediately decided to leave and sign for Western Sydney as a result. I thought that was very good. Yeah, Markovic, like from a football perspective, he's probably the type of player that clubs should be trying to attract with these designated players. Relatively young, has pedigree, could come in, do the job. But in terms grading him entirely on sugar hit and NRI factor, like we know is the strategy of the league, on the record, strategy of the league, don't think he moves the dial on that front. But I still think he's a good signing.
Teo, just did a bit of research. Yeah, Teo, just did a bit of research into what Danny Osvaldo's up to these days. He now goes by the name of Danny Stone, and he's purely focusing on his music career. And it looks like he's actually doing all right for himself. So I don't know what sort of...
There's a lot of money in the Australian music scene. He could make the hottest 100.
Well, I mean, if we could lure him over to Bondi, I mean, Bondi...
Angus and Julia Stone won the hottest 100. Danny Stone, this is music heritage.
So what you're saying is we could have a collab, Angus, Danny, and Julius Stone. Like, they just become a trifecta now. Oh, there goes Josh.
Yeah,
but I'm saying that Danny Osvaldo, like, I mean, he hasn't played in 2 years, and he's only played, I think, 2 games since 2016. But I'm sure he'd still, do decent, maybe at NPL level, but I'm not sure about A-League. But, hey, if you want to lure him to Bondi, I reckon he'd love the lifestyle down there, hanging out with Lubo. I reckon they get along like a house on fire.
Here we go. I just checked the list. Juan Mata is still a free agent. Apparently, he's in talks with Leeds, according to Spanish press. But Juan Mata is still a free agent. Spain. Sorry. Adelaide loves their aging Spanish players. There you go. Juan Mata to Adelaide.
And
Make that happen.
If this will get relegated, surely all bets are off for both Iniesta and Bojan. So.
I mean, at least with Juan Mata, you know that 1% of the APL Silver Lake money is going to a good cause. So, shall we move on?
I got it, Josh. It was a good one. I got it, Josh.
All right, shall we move on to actual transfers rather than fantasy booking transfers? James Troisi joining Western United. This was greeted with, safe to say, a mixed reception for a player who divides opinion, shall we say, Nick?
I don't see I'm being brutally honest, I don't see the purpose in this signing at all. I don't see the point in it. I had someone say it's squad depth, but what's Nick Milanovic then? I know that he's young, and I know that West United have gone for older players, but what's the point of Nick Milanovic? What was the point of potentially going to 2 up top in the finals as the backup option to Diamanti and it actually working off the break with Prijovic and Dylan Wenzelhorst up top, and then going and signing James Troisi off his worst season? He's 34 years old. I mean, James Troisi had some quality when he was younger, and we've seen his highlight reel. He's got a nice highlight reel. He's got a lot of spectacular goals, but just in my opinion, I just don't think this is the sort of signing Western United should have been targeting. They quietly announced the re-signings of Diamanti, Kilkenny, and Ben Garuccio during the week, which I understand were actually signed last year or last season. But I think that they should have been targeting elsewhere. Where's the they haven't, like, I know they've re-signed Pasquale after losing Skatardis and Rene Krin, and they're keeping Luke Giselle, but we know obviously the chances of them playing, let's be real, probably not as high as them, say, signing another 6. They haven't gone to bring in another 6 just yet. And they've signed James Troisi. I just don't see what the strategy here is. I know it's to ostensibly run it back and bring in another veteran who has won A-League championships and has played for the Socceroos and has played overseas, and a guy that has, pedigree from a decent resume, but he didn't have a great season last year. And, it begs the question, like, who is the starting 10 next year? What, is it Diamanti? Is it Troisi? Like, long-term vision here, where's it going? Because for someone like Nick Milanovic now, who's, I think, probably around 20, 21 years old now, off the top of my head, he would be wanting to start to get some more regular minutes. And when we saw Nick Milanovic last season, I was very impressed with what we saw. I thought there was one game in particular against MacArthur that he scored. He looked really good before he got injured. In little spates that we saw him when he came off the bench, I think he showed something in the past few years that he's played. But there's the fact that it seemed as if, all right, if Diamanti can't get through a full season, we're going to sign another 34-year-old on a one-year deal. I have my questions about that because it just doesn't seem like there's any planning for what comes beyond that period. Because you could sign as many older players as you want, but if you're not thinking long term, what if all these players is a bit of an exodus at the end of this season? Like, who's next? He's going to sign another lot of 6 or 7 veterans who are in their 30s to just replace the 6 or 7 veterans that leave, because that strategy, as we've seen. And it's something we probably shouldn't be surprised with when you look at John Aloisi's dad's army at Brisbane Roar from that season where they finished 6th. It's something that he looks at. He looks at bringing in veterans, guys who have been there and done that, and probably not look towards, more of a long-term project. And I mean, that might be me putting words in the mouth of people. Sorry, Joey. In terms of, them, maybe they do have strategy for guys like Botic and Theoharis and Milanovic and Bozanovsky, etc., to come through and get minutes and be part of the project long-term. But I just don't see it at the moment when they make signings like Troisi.
I mean, who's going to be the Keegan Smith equivalent, blowing kisses to an aging Diamanti or Macaroni stand-in this season as John Aloisi's squad gets older and older? I mean, the worrying pattern is that John Aloisi had a very, very good first season at Brisbane Roar, and the longer he coached them, the worse they got, and the older the squad got, the older the age profile of the players. So they're riding on a high now, and they deserve the benefit of the doubt, having just won a championship. Not going to stick the knife in just yet, but I don't love this Troisi signing for all of the reasons that Nick outlined.
Just comes back to A-League transfers in general. I mean, you can look at half of them and wonder why they were made. It just speaks to ongoing strategies surrounding the A-League. We can pick the eyes out of the Troisi deal all we like, and I'd agree with both Nick and you, Josh, that there are question marks on it, but at the same time, given all our doubts about Western United heading into last season and then winning the championship, very much prepared to end up with egg on my face again. But it goes towards a lot of the transfers that happen in the A-League men competition. A lot of the time you are left scratching your head and asking, is this player being signed just because they represent a somewhat known quantity, or is there an actual strategy behind it? Just the latest in the long line of that, as far as I can tell.
Just,
all right,
sorry, Josh, just one thing I think just to keep in mind as well is, this is not just Troisi coming in and in terms of what their strategy is for who starts, etc. This is Diamanti at 39 years old coming off a serious knee injury as well. And we saw the regression in his performances from his first season to now in that first half of the season where, he wasn't really impacting games in the same way. They ostensibly looked better with him actually out of the team. I think that, when they went to someone like Lockie Wales, Dylan Wenzel-Halls off the break, they actually looked a lot better when they were able to break with speed. And not having someone like Diamanti, who, again, I rate Diamanti very highly for what he does when he has the ball at his feet. But now at the age that he's at, it did in some games come at a bit of a hindrance because you get the ball halfway and try and ping a first-time ball to someone like Payne or someone like Wales or Perez, whoever it was on the wing. And, there wasn't the same sort of, control of a game that he had in, say, his first season when he came here, and he was really, bossing games and taking over. So I'm just curious to see, like, once the Australia Cup starts in, I think their first game's in about 3 weeks from Wednesday, is, when we get a bit of an idea as to what their best 11 is Diamanti now seen as the backup and is Troisi now the starter? And we know Troisi's flaws in his game in terms of the way that he plays. I actually don't think that this is the right move. And the team that will want to play on the break, I actually think that if, say, they keep Prijovic and they went Prijovic and Wenzel-Halls up top, I actually don't think that is a bad move at all by any stretch. I think if they had gone back with that partnership that actually really worked come finals time, and the way that Western United wanted to play with them two linking up as quite a solid tandem, for me, that was the way to go. But look, you know what? As you mentioned, Joey, we had questions about a lot of their signings at the end of at the start of last season with guys like Kilkenny and Topple Stanley, etc. And I mean, Kilkenny was solid, wasn't spectacular, but he was solid. Topple Stanley filled in and did his job from time to time before he got injured. So if there's egg on our face in, about 10 months time and James Troisi turns into a goals and assists merchant and, he's firmly in the Josh Parrish 11 with Craig Goodwin, then sensational. Like, good on Western United for nailing it. But it's just the worrying trend about where does this put guys like Milanovic? Does Milanovic now need to look at a move elsewhere to start getting some minutes, to do some of the other guys? Like, because the flow-on effect of this as well is when Lockie Wales was coming in even as a backup 10, that was the only opportunity for, say, someone like Dylan Perez to see minutes because Dylan Perez was firmly behind Lockie Wales in the pecking order. So there's this whole flow-on effect that I think there'd be a few Western United players maybe thinking, is there going to be much scope for me to get minutes this season? Am I better served maybe looking for a move elsewhere where maybe I might be able to get a few more minutes going into the upcoming A-League men's season? So I think it'll be a curious watch nonetheless.
Well, I don't think James Troisi is ever making my 11, by the way, Nick. If anyone listened to For Fuck's Sake circa 2018, they know my thoughts. Let's talk about Mark Birighitti going to the Cinch, the Scottish Premiership. Another A-League club picks up a transfer fee for a player heading to Scotland. What do we think of this one?
I think good on the Mariners for holding their ground and demanding a fee rather than letting Birighitti leave the club for nothing. However, it's not good for the Central Coast Mariners, I think, just moving forward, given how good that Birighitti was for them last season. I'm going to look up the stats right now about, how many goals, his expected goals that he saved, but he has been on a pure shot-stopping basis the premier goalkeeper across the last two seasons which coincided with the Mariners going on these magical runs and surprising all of us. Yeah, here we go. I'm looking at it right now. According to FOTMob, last season, Mark Birighitti prevented 11.1 goals. The next best in the competition was Joe Gauci with 7.6, and then you have to go down to Jamie Young in third with 3.8. So you can see the amount.
That's stark, actually. I mean, we were going on about it all last season. I think me in particular, obviously, my hot take, but that's actually really good data to back it up.
Mark Birighitti, there was a lot of obviously Kai Rolls has become the hottest thing since sliced bread, since, with his breakout with the Socceroos, and we're all big Dan Hall fans as well. But you can't discount maybe they were made to look a bit better than they were, perhaps because their mistakes were being bailed out by Mark Birighitti. Still, I think we're all still, to quote a certain someone, we're all still Dan Hall truthers here. But now that Mark Birighitti has departed, it's going to be super interesting to see just how defensively resolute the Central Coast Mariners are moving forward. Yaron Souza is on the books. I like Yaron. I've known him since he was in the Melbourne City youth system. It was a weird situation there where he was in a job share with James Delianov. And given how many raps James Delianov had on him as a prospect, and Adelaide is still keeping him around even though they've got Joe Gauci on the books, that Yaron Souza was in a job share with him shows the esteem that he was held at by the Melbourne City youth coaches. So I don't think it's a complete cataclysmic disaster if he starts in the coming season, but there is inevitably going to be a downgrade on Mark Birighitti, and I'm going to be super interested to see just what happens to the Mariners' defensive record as a result of his departure, if it indeed does come off like reports have said.
Just confirming that it was Dundee United. I apologise if I got it wrong before. That is a very sensitive topic. But they finished fourth in the league last season.
They're playing Europe. They're playing in Europe.
don't score too high on the NRI, even if there are two of them. But Dundee United seem to be a decent outfit. Do we think, Scotland essentially becoming the new championship for Australian players leaving the A-League is a positive thing?
The economics must have changed at some point. I'm not sure what's going on in Scotland to make that a magnet, but clearly Australia is embracing the opportunity to have a conveyor belt of players going out there. Just on this, but also talking about Milanovic, does the intra A-League loan system, is that age limited for goalkeepers as well as outfield players? Because it feels as though, is this a situation where you're probably not going to find a potential replacement starter within the A-League who is under the age of 23, which I believe is the age limitation for outfielders. Correct me if I'm wrong.
James Delianov is 22. So if you did want to get a loan.
He is young enough. Okay. But I mean, someone like a Daniel Margush is 24.
Yeah,
so
he doesn't count.
But does it apply to goalkeepers the same way it applies to outfielders? I mean, I'm sitting here listening to Nick talk about Milanovic. I'm sitting here wondering, well, if Sydney FC land their targets, what are they going to do with Jaden Kaczarski, who they've signed to come in from underneath, even though he's currently, in a goal for goal race to win the Golden Boot in the New South Wales NPL as a 20-year-old. And if you're a 20-year-old at the Mariners, you've got 40 appearances to your name. If you're a 20-year-old at Sydney FC, you haven't made the bench yet. And so it's like Moragas going to Wellington, which I think was a really smart move. Wellington, what obligation do they have to play him under that agreement? That is going to be the mystery that the season determines. But I still think Newcastle, after signing Sotirio and McGarry, did the right thing by Moragas, letting him go and at least fight against what we perceive to be less competition in a different team within the intra A-League loan system.
Problem is with the intra A-League loan system is just there's so few options. Like inevitably, if you're loaning out one of your young players, you're limited to what, maybe 3 or 4 at most, probably more accurately to be just 1 or 2 teams that have sufficient holes in their roster that they would be willing to consider playing your offshoots. And even then, not most of the time, those clubs, if they're going to be playing a youngster under the age of 23, they'd much rather be getting minutes into a young player that they actually have the contract for, rather than...
This is where, and I know it's your hobby horse, Joey, but this is where the absence of a National Youth League becomes particularly punishing over the summer months, I think, because we're trying to actually find round holes for the various square pegs to get these players into, just so they can get some game time. It's not our job; it's the club's job.
And I do fire off messages about the A-League youth competition to the APL, every couple of months. Any news? Any news? Any news? We're working on it. Like, they've had so much other stuff on, with COVID and apparently that they're working on it. It's coming. We'll let you know when there's news. But unless something's, I haven't heard anything yet.
It's actually an out of office reply that they automatically send Joey when he contacts them now. So
no, I've started making phone calls, so they can't do that. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure, and it's not just me. I'm sure A-League men coaches, I'm sure A-League youth coaches would love another, an actual proper youth competition for these lads to play in, and not just that bullshit tournament that the Y League was, but an actual youth competition, because it's remarkable. I'm going off on a tangent here, I apologize, but the entire A-League's tagline heading into last season was, "Here comes the future." And they didn't have a bloody youth, they don't have a bloody youth league. Like, before we talk about the intellectual inconsistencies, surrounding player utilization and deployment and what archetypes of young players even receive minutes in the A-League men, one would think that just from an infrastructure perspective, if you're going to hang your hat off young players coming through, here comes the future, eat your Tilios, you'd have a youth league in place. Tilio starred in a Y League grand final and was best on ground in Sydney FC's win over Melbourne Victory. The next Tilio can't do that because there's no youth competition for him to star in.
I'm just imagining the terror at APL HQ when Joey's face lights up on a phone screen and the options are answer and answer. Nick, you wanted to jump in?
I guess the thing that you mentioned about, youth, obviously loan deals, youth league, everything like that. This is where, I know that this causes so much ruckus. First there's two things I want to say to that. If we're doing an A-League youth competition as well, I don't want to hear any of those galaxy brain takes about promote straight away the MPL versions of these teams to the top tier of their respective MPLs and have them there as like placeholders because it would be good for them to play against men every week. No, let them earn their way there, please, because as we've seen with some of these MPL teams, when they get pillaged and they have to put out, 1 week they're playing the guys that are playing, like, we saw with Victory, for instance, this weekend, Josh, when you were there. Like this week, they were playing basically full strength. They had Brooks, Valupale, Will Wilson, Pershaw, list goes on. They even have Edmund Lepanchu, who played the night before, playing that game. And then the week before that, they have to play guys like Jackson Leno and Hamaskovsky and Casper Hallam and Paddy Hogan, guys who are ostensibly in the 21s team. So if we're going to do that, this is where as well, as I was going back to, if you had the MPL in line with the A-League in terms of a match calendar and being able to just, if we didn't have a second division, to loan them to MPL sides like Central Coast have done with Manny Agwek. And we've seen Manny Agwek has had a really good run over the last few weeks. That can be beneficial in that sense. But Teo, you mentioned about goalkeepers. I think the goalkeeper limit, if there is an age limit that sort of, it's an umbrella age limit that sets from goalkeepers all the way through to attackers. I think with goalkeepers, there has to be a bit of leniency. I think it's got to be looking at something at maybe the age of about 25, 26, because we know goalkeepers develop, and play all the way until, they're in their 40s. So,
and
for
it's also
someone
harder to get first team minutes in a position.
Absolutely. And this is an opportunity for guys like, looking at Sydney FC. I know Thomas Heward-Bell was on the books of the Mariners, but I mean, he'd be perfect for a loan deal, say, going to Central Coast for a season and actually playing football because he had a really good stint when he was in the team. I mean, just having a look at the comments here, Antonis mentions guys like James Delianov being a backup to Gauchi and Ethan Cox and Stephen Hall. They've got 3 goalkeepers that could probably get it done at Victory. Ahmed Taleb, I think, could really do with a loan deal because I think, again, he's going to be the number 3 this year behind Matt Acton and Paul Izzo. But from speaking to people at Victory, they rate him very highly. So maybe there's an opportunity for him to go on a loan deal. City have been talking up James Neuvenhuizen as, having a really good season in the MPL. I mean, there are goalkeepers out there, but I think with the loan system, there has to be some leniency with that because, as we've said, goalkeepers develop and they play longer. I mean, there has to be scope for it. And, it also comes back to, as you mentioned, Teo, about like, I mean, what sort of point do you have in playing them if, they're not ours and we're only going to have them on a concrete loan deal? My one worry about Moragas is I just don't want another Matt Bozanovsky situation where he goes there and just doesn't play, like just collects dust. But I think someone like Moragas, who's a bit more proven at senior level, with someone who might really benefit from it and might actually see some minutes, whether it's on a left wing or playing alongside Sam Sutton in some way, and they find a way to play both. I think that's something to really keep an eye on.
Shout out to Toros, by the way, pointing out that to add to Teo's point about Scotland, there's a lower point system, so it's easier to get a visa over there. So basically,
right.
Another thing we can blame on Brexit. I think.
Well, just 2 things. One, yes, PFA are going to be angry with me and point out that there's no benefits, but surely the easiest solution is just to have a proper system of player movement so you could loan anybody and sell anybody and all of that sort of stuff. Although I know that's a hornet's nest and I'm not smart enough to actually figure out what the actual solution is. I'm just a big dumb idiot that likes my, football to be football and that sort of stuff. Anyway, just
Joey's cracking. We're the 2 market. He's cracked.
No, just
I don't know what that impression was.
It's like my big damn Southerner. I like my pickup trucks. And
is this a Ted Lasso bit? I'm miles away.
It's just my go-to stupid accent, Southern red.
Yeah, aside from the normal one. Yeah.
Are you trying to?
Okay, all right.
I think you were trying to mock like NFL fans or something, Josh. Like Josh Showy. Sorry, I thought that was something.
No,
like,
it'd be more average. Big down and
I
Alabama
think let's
like
wrap
that.
it.
It'd be more college football. No, and the other thing is, as Ivan from Corio has pointed out, you can also loan goalkeepers to the NPL. And that way, although you do run into the problems then of the fact that the NPL and the A-League don't run concurrently, so that even if these young players do go out and get minutes in the NPL, they just come back during the summer and then don't get minutes during the summer because there's no youth competition.
All right, let's
or reserve competition.
Let's go to the Women's Euros. We've got Teo Pellizzeri with us today, who's been covering it in detail. Teo, give us the short and sweet version of what we've seen so far and what people need to know about what's occurred.
Everyone expected it to go chalk. The tournament was seeded very well. The perhaps biggest surprise is Austria getting through at the expense of Norway. For me, the biggest surprise has been the teams in the top 10 of the FIFA rankings are smashing the teams in the teens in the FIFA rankings. So Germany beats Denmark 4-0, France beats Italy 5-1, England beats Norway 8-0. These are extraordinary one-sided matches. And you got to remember, 31 teams got knocked out in qualifying. It's a 16-team Euro. So I think we're still trying to get to the bottom of why this is. Is it just the heightened level of professionalism and organisation coaching of the very top teams that even the mid-tier teams have been left behind? I think England-Spain in the quarterfinals is going to be particularly telling. Everyone can point to Jenny Hermoso, who is Dragan and Correa's favourite player, or Alexia Putellas. But it's only two players out of a team that 3 weeks ago was apparently nailed on certs to win the World Cup. Now they're a bunch of dysfunctional frauds. I mean, what a difference 3 weeks makes, right? So I think that we are at a point of the tournament where the big teams will now play each other. Italy may get through if they beat Belgium. Nick, I know you were a little bit pessimistic about it, but I've actually seen enough of them to suspect that they probably will beat Belgium and France will beat Iceland. Problem for France is Marie-Antoinette Katoto did an ACL, so they now are missing their best striker. Spain don't have their best striker, and here's Germany with Alexandra Pop scoring in all three games, England with Beth Mead and Alexia Russo and all of this, Ellen White, all scoring for fun. So my pre-tournament pick was France-England. Now it's looking highly likely to be England-Germany. But yeah, the tournament has gone chalk. What it does tell me is women's football with the 32-team World Cup and the 16-team Euros has it right. And men's with the convoluted 24-team Euro where third-place teams go through and heading for this apocalyptic 48-team World Cup, they've got it wrong. So the 2 decades of World Cups and Euros that I grew up with is now in the women's football space instead of the men's. But it has been a very entertaining tournament. Average of more than 3 goals a game. So if you are pulling the late ones or getting up early, you are getting rewarded for your time. And a bit of divergence of opinion on some of the very top teams and why they are the top teams. Spain, the most fascinating of all of them. But I'm going to abandon France as my pre-tournament pick. And the final, I suspect, will be England against Germany from here.
So are the English, as Phil Neville memorably asserted in 2019, getting to the point where they now are inspiring? Are they in it to win it?
Look, for all the pelters that Phil Neville copped, he still took them to a third-place finish, or is it third or fourth in a World Cup. I mean, they've made consecutive semi-finals. They were already one of the best teams in the world. It is about just getting over the hump and going over the top. But I really do think that they've been outstanding. In a group where you would have expected them to win all 3 games, no one expected them to beat Norway 8-0. And the recriminations from that in Norway have been spectacular, to say the least, and you can read all about it on the Optus Sport website. But I think that England, their mass investment in both the national teams at all levels and also the WSL, taking football seriously, not just as a branding exercise, but as a footballing exercise, has been rewarded. And I do think that, Italy, Spain, even Portugal, they're going to catch up. That Matilda's friendly against Portugal. Porto does not have a team in the top league. Benfica has only been in the top league for 2 years. Sporting Club has been there for a long time. They're the establishment. The same way that Arsenal were there forever, and then Chelsea came in, and then Manchester United came in, and now Liverpool is coming in, and it all perpetuates and concentrates the best players and the money and obviously the level of performance. So I think I have, with no sense of hyperbole whatsoever, equated it to previous World Cups in terms of both the quality of football, the crowds, and also the standard in terms of the overall tournament. I don't think it's an unjustified or overhyped thing to say this tournament is as good, if not better, than the 2015 World Cup. Maybe not 2019, but 2015, absolutely.
While we're on the subject of women's football, on the A-League Women's Contest, we got a comment, Teo. I got my own thoughts on it, but I'll throw it to you first. One of the comments coming in asking, we've been talking about Marquees. I meant to bring it up again, but this Marquee Fund, this Silver Lake Fund, it's not just for the men. It's also potentially for a women. I know Western United very interested in bringing in a marquee name for their first A-League women's season, certainly getting in marquee names in the years ahead. However, we did have a comment asking if Ji So-yun would serve as an effective A-League women's marquee for the competition, and if the A-League women could afford to bring her in. I think I can answer the latter question by saying absolutely. If the APL is genuine surrounding being equitable with their Silver Lake funding, the sheer economics of women's football mean that there is probably no women's footballer on the planet, purely from a salary perspective, that would be out of reach. If the A-Leagues are paying $2 million to Nani, as some reports have come around, well, combination of Victory and the A-Leagues, $2 million would get you most women's football players. I don't think that's the problem. The problem then comes with players, the standard of competition that you can offer them, the living experiences that you can offer them, and so on and so forth. But Teo, do you think Ji So-yun would be a ticket mover in A-League Women?
This competition had Ellie Carpenter, Steph Catley, Sam Kerr, name every Matilda playing in it, and the same 300 people went to Melbourne Victory and Melbourne City, and maybe 50 unique people to each club, depending on which side of town it was, whether it was ABD or Epping or in the southeast, Bentley Greens or Dandenong City. We've had the biggest names in world football play in this league already, and it didn't work. It's about building accessibility to the league.
Yeah.
And if you jump onto my Twitter and see the athletic interest video I posted up there about medium is the message with how athletics, track and field is utilizing TikTok the same way traditional sports utilize TV. We're hearing a lot about innovation. Some of it draws, a bit of a groan, but I actually do think that, we changed the name. We gave that a go. I think we're going to change the method of delivery. We'll give that a go. It's not about high name recognition players. We've had the highest name recognition players. Melbourne City had the proxy Matildas play for them for, an entire season, and they couldn't really get their crowds above 500. So names aren't the answer. The competition itself.
It's a culture.
It's the culture, but it's also the accessibility. It's playing at venues that are easy to get to. It's putting it in front of people and making it super easy to access. And it's reaching the target demographic in their timeline, in the apps that they open. I think that's the way to do it rather than purely names.
Marquees didn't start the fire. Sorry.
We did Billy Joel last week. Yeah, we did Billy Joel last week.
I was just thinking back to that article Teo wrote about dub venues in Victoria.
But we continue to add names to that list. So,
But no, I'm in complete concurrence with Teo. I don't like. There's been rumors flying around. Maybe Melbourne City looking at bringing in a marquee name from England as well. That's currently a free agent. But
who's bigger than Ellie Carpenter though?
That's exactly my point.
Who's bigger than Steph Catley? Who's bigger than Kerr?
Exactly. It's marquee names might be decreed as a potential mover for the A-League men competition, but as Teo points out, we've seen the biggest marquee names you can get playing in the A-League women's already. Sam Kerr was literally a marquee. She was being paid, 7 figures by Football Australia to come back and play for Perth Glory, or maybe not 7 figures, but it was a lot of money. And it didn't stop the exodus of Matildas occurring. If you're going to build up the A-League women's competition, it has to be there has to be a focus on teams and the league itself. It's got to be people that follow the league for the teams, and they're an emotional connection, because I think it's become very apparent at this point that the league is transitional in nature. Players are going to move overseas. you need to build up that connection with fans. You need to give them a reason to go. You need to make it easy for them to go as well, taking into account the different demographics of the people that go. One of the biggest complaints I always used to see when Melbourne City was playing out at ABD Stadium was how far away it was from public transport, and about how especially it's something that we as men on this podcast are privileged to not have to deal with. But if you are a woman going to an A-League women's game late at night and you're stuck around waiting for public transport, or there's very few public transport options, there's safety concerns that you have to worry about.
Adults, just adults in general. Think about the number of fans who are just not old enough to drive themselves to these venues, which are prohibitive unless you have a car.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of factors surrounding that. Of course, speak for Melbourne, one of our biggest problems is rectangular stadia that have public transport access, but that's another problem. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of factors that I think are more important than Marquees when it comes to the A-League Women's.
All right, I think that just about wraps it up for the evening here on the National Curriculum. Thank you to Joey, thank you to Nick, and especially thank you to Teo Pellizzeri for making your TNC return. And we look out for your Optus Sport writings during the week on the Women's Euros. Anything to plug before we go, gents?
I'll let
yes. Then the Brisbane Roar versus Aston Villa game on Wednesday night on 10 Play, and the Australia Cup on 10 Play as well, starting with the Bentley versus Broadmeadow game as the main game, but I will be on Bonnyrigg versus Oakley Cannons that night. So thank you for getting all the plugs in, fellas, and much appreciated.
Myself, I should have a piece out in ESPN in the coming days looking at a bit of a Socceroos depth chart. Heading into the next few weeks. Obviously, the top of the depth chart pretty much writes itself. However, there is some quotes in there from Graham Arnold as well about a few other factors, exclusive quotes. Working, not sure when it will be out, but in the final stages of working on a big, long read about the Afghan women's national team. It's something that I'm super proud of. Hoping to give those that read it a bit of an insight, not just into who these amazing individuals are as figures of inspiration and resistance, but people and footballers and that sort of thing. I've gone along to a lot and spoken to them, and to give people a bit of an insight into the people behind the inspiration. And oh God, I've got pictures out as well, so we'll have to see if anybody accepts my pictures and runs them. Oh, and Extra Time, Football Victoria Extra Time. That's out every week. NPL highlight show. Get on that. Get around that on npl.tv.
Yeah, if you're watching this live, head over to the AFL website. Full match report of Melbourne versus Port Adelaide.
Holding a Sharon. Yes.
Just him and Marcus Rashford. Piss off.
Got my Sharon. No, so head over to the AFL website for all of that. And obviously as well, just on top of that, and I'm sure Joey will also have something in for AAP or something coming up for Manchester United, Crystal Palace. So keep an eye on your News Corp papers for United Palace wrap up after Tuesday night, so Wednesday morning.
Not much from me. I might have a video out next week about why Australia has a 0.1% chance of winning the World Cup. So if you want to know how that works,
so you're telling me there's a chance?
On my Twitter. Yes. We'll talk to the Boffins at Stats Perform about how that model actually works. I'm sure people saw the graphic that was doing the rounds. There was actually a typo in the graphic that was on most social media that said we had a 0.01% chance. But I'm happy to report that, in fact, our chances are 10 times better than you thought. So 1 in 1,000. 1 in 1,000. Jim Carrey meme here.
That's what we like to hear.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you, gents. We'll speak to you again next Sunday.
I forgot to tee up the outro music.
Oh, dear, Joey. Oh, dear.